Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo. Speaker Chris Winslow from Stone Labs. However, before that, I'd like to ask past President Walt McGee to deliver a reflection and then have Gary Murphy lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
As we mourn the passing of Congressman John Lewis, some words from the making of the earth from the Blackfoot Indians. During the flood, Old Man was sitting on highest mountain with all the beasts. The flood was caused by the above people because a baby, a fungus of a woman who married a star who was heedlessly torn in pieces by an Indian child. Old Man sent the otter down to get some earth. For a long time he waited, and then the otter came up dead. Old Man examined its feet, but found nothing on them. Next he sent beaver down, but after a long time he also came up drowned. Again, nothing was found on his feet, so he sent muskrat to dive next. Muskrat also was drowned. At length he sent the duck. It was drowned, but in its paw held some earth. Old Man saw it, put it in his hand, feigned putting it in the water 3 times, and at last dropped it. And then the above people sent rain, and everything grew on the earth. We praise and thank you, Lord, for the gift of the living waters, Lake Erie and the Maumee. Guide us to use these waters wisely, to learn from the waters humility, consume it sparingly, and protect its purity, so that with the people of Ohio and their Canadian neighbors, we may truly enjoy the benefits of the waters we have been given. Let us not trouble the water. Amen.
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 I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we begin our meeting today, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Walt Churchill's Market as this month's sponsor. A couple of brief announcements before we get to our speaker or before we get to the next topic. The COVID Task Force Committee had their final meeting on Thursday. We have basically have a recommendation that we're going to share with the board. The board meets this Tuesday and will make a final decision, which will be shared with all members in this week's spoke. Also, I'm very happy to announce that the Rotary offices will be moving to the Toledo Club, and final steps are currently underway now to make that move. And finally, I do want to remind everybody and encourage you to sign up for committees. If you haven't yet done so, again, there's an open window for you to sign up. This is the time to do that. Rotarians, again, once you're on a committee, that's how we serve our community. And this is just the avenue for that. If you have any questions, please shoot an email to Kathy or Abby, or even give me a phone call and ask me what committee might suit you best. And now I'd like to invite Chuck Mann to introduce a new member.
Dan Pienta is a passionate business owner and family man. He is a graduate of St. John's High School and attended the University of Toledo. After serving his country as a United States Marine, he returned home to work at the family business as a second-generation operator. While rising through the ranks to president, Dan used his engineering skills to become involved in over a dozen U.S. patents. Dan departed that business in 2017, seeking to elevate a new team and to bring his outside perspective to an existing business. In July of 2019, Dan purchased Fry Heating and Cooling from former Toledo Rotarian Tom Fry, and Dan is now fully engaged in helping fry, heating, and cooling to be their absolute best. Dan and his wife of 26 years, Diana, have 5 children from the ages of 23 to 9. They live on an 80-acre farm near Monroe, Michigan, which serves as a small incubator for his children's learning. Dan's passion for trying something new, either through his children or for himself, is part of his DNA. He has 2 pet peeves: people and things that move too slowly, and pinhead Rotarians who ask him silly pet peeve questions. Fellow Rotarians, please join co-sponsor John Federke and me as we welcome Dan Pienta to the fellowship and comfort of Toledo Rotary.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Dan, I'd just certainly like to welcome you and let you know that now you're part of one of the largest Rotary clubs in the world. We look forward to your leadership.
Great. Thank you, President Alex. Appreciate it.
And now I'd like to introduce Rob Crane from the Black Swamp Conservancy to introduce today's speaker, Chris Winslow of Stone Labs.
Is Chris with us? Should I do the intro?
I believe he is.
Fantastic. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Chris Winslow, who's going to speak with us today, the director of the Ohio Sea Grant Program in the Ohio State University's Stone Laboratory, where he's currently managing more than 150 grants totaling more than $14 million. And those grants include things such as algal bloom science, fisheries, green infrastructure, dredging, crude oil transport, and pharmaceutical care products. Dr. Winslow's recent publications include topics such as phosphorus reduction, usage impairment criteria for large water bodies, and fish passage through man-made structures here in Lake Erie. He's involved in numerous committees and boards, including the International Joint Commission Science Advisory Board, the Lake Erie Area Research Network, and the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement Annex. Dr. Winslow resides in Columbus with his wife, Kim, and their 2 young daughters, but he spends a great deal of time up here at the lake at Stone Labs Laboratory. So we're really excited to have him today, and looking forward to this presentation, and thank him for joining us.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I apologize for joining late. Internet issues, and I threw out my back yesterday, so I'm sitting as rigid as I can in my house right now. So you guys are my precursor to an acupuncture appointment at 3 p.m., so relief is coming soon. Let me see if I can share my screen here, and we'll get right into this. I know that you have a lot of business to get to, so we'll take care of this real quickly. Thank you for that kind introduction. Is everybody seeing the title slide that says Dr. Seuss, the Lorax was wrong?
You're good.
Okay, great. So the meaning behind the title here is, if many of you that don't know the book, the Lorax, there's a line in the first edition that says that Lake Erie's schmeary and the fish are dreary. A lot of the work that was described by Rob prior to coming on this call, we had some graduate students and a faculty member write a letter to Dr. Seuss explaining the increase in the health of Lake Erie since the late 60s, early 70s. And they actually got a letter back from the author. And in any edition of the book you have post that first edition, the word Lake Erie is actually struck from the book. And so that's why that's in the title. There are some issues still in Lake Erie, but there are a lot of things that we're doing a lot of great work to resolve. Logos first, just at the bottom, far left. The program that I have the pleasure of working for is partially funded by NOAA. We are a Sea Grant program. That's the logo you're seeing on the far right. Basically, any state that bumps into the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Gulf, or one of the Great Lakes has a Sea Grant program. And our goal is really to conduct research and do education and outreach around issues that are plaguing Lake Erie, for us specifically Lake Erie. And so the middle logo is because I do work out of Ohio State University Stone Laboratory, so about 1/3 of my budget also comes from the university. I've been talking with some members of your Rotary. I have a great highlight of some of the things that they wanted to have me address for your audience here, so I'll kind of tick through those. Of course, one that was of major concern was the recent algal blooms. I say recent, this image only goes back to 2002. This basically is an image of the western basin of Lake Erie all the way in through the central part of Lake Erie. What you're looking at is black, means there's no detection of these harmful algal blooms, but the warmer colors mean high concentrations and the cooler colors mean low concentrations. You can see in some of these years, 2011 was the second worst bloom on record, 2015 the worst bloom on record, and last year after that rainy year was a pretty elevated record. Since this harmful algal bloom forecast is around, we have been every year, it's usually the second Thursday of July, we work with our academic and NOAA partners to give a forecast for every year. To make that forecast, meaning predicting how big the bloom might be in any given year, you need to see nutrient inputs into the system. So it's nitrogen and phosphorus that drive these blooms. So this data that I'm showing you here was the information that Dr. Laura Johnson gave on our past forecast, which was just roughly 2 weeks ago. Laura is the director of the National Center for Water Quality Research. Basically, what's on the vertical axis, this acronym TBP stands for total bioavailable phosphorus. So this is the phosphorus that is dissolved in mommy water that when it gets into the lake can cause these blooms and algae. What it shows you is the maximum year since basically 2002, the minimum year in that same time period. It plots the previous 2 years, 19 is in black and 18 is in purple. And I'm just showing you here that as of the forecast, again, roughly 2 weeks ago, this is the average, or this is not the average, this is the cumulative load of phosphorus into the system. So we take this information and we give you this. This comes from Dr. Rick Stump from NOAA. This is a algal forecast for the lake. So this is where we go in and actually tell you what the bloom will likely be. And so this is the actual measurements are all in green, again, from 2002 to basically present. And then based on that nutrient loading I showed you on the previous slide, you know, how it comes in relative to 18 and 19 and the worst year on record and the lowest year on record. This is what we think the bloom will be in this current year. So the black bar is the estimate, and then there's some variability in the shades of red above and beyond that. You will see on this graph, we've marked the objective. So if you're paying attention to your Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, we need to be at that gray line or below 9 out of 10 years for us to consider lake to be recovered. As you can see, we're not going to be there this year, and we haven't been for the last, well, since 2013. So for the last 7 years. I did want to talk about some of the stuff that we're doing in this space. So this forecast that I'm showing you here is just for Western Basin of Lake Erie. On this year's forecast, we invited a guest speaker that was from the US EPA, but he has partners through NASA, NOAA, and the USGS. So for you, those of you that don't spend a lot of time on Western Lake Erie, but do recreate on other larger lakes across the country, there is now an app out called CYAN, CYAN mobile app. It's the Cyanobacteria Assessment Network. Basically, they've learned the lessons or used the lessons they've learned from Lake Erie to now forecast for larger lakes. This grid that I've set up in the left-hand side, these are all the lakes. Those black dots represent all the lakes that are large enough to use this satellite tool. And then this is me zooming in on Lake Winnebago, and it shows you the same thing. So this is a real-time forecast using satellites. Warm colors mean high incidence of bloom. Cool colors mean low incidence. But you can see in Ohio, there's probably 24 lakes that you can see these blooms, how they develop and how big they are. This was important for us in this HAB space because a lot of people know what's going on in Lake Erie because of its huge asset for the state. This is an amazing resource, but a lot of people recreate on other lakes. And so we heard that cry, and this is why the USGS, NOAA, EPA, and NASA put this together. The other thing we always get asked is people think that if the bloom is really intense or really green, that it's really toxic. And our research has been able to show that bloom size does not correlate to toxicity. So the argument you might make from this picture is, okay, I know where the bloom is at and where it's the most green, but how do I know whether I have to stay out of the water or not? So the other talk we introduced on our forecast the other day was what's called M-Bio. It's a field portable toxin system. So basically now we have technology that's in the hopper. It's not out and commercially available now, but soon will be. You can go out and take a sample as shown in this top left-hand picture. You have to extract the toxin. So basically there is some toxin floating in the water, but sometimes a lot of that toxin is actually within the cyanobacteria cells. So this little apparatus would extract those toxins from those cells. You would then put a drop of that water sample onto what looks like a USB card, and you would slide it into this device. And in near real time, meaning 20 to 30 minutes, you would know exactly how many toxins are in the water. Again, this is huge because a lot of the beaches along Lake Erie and many of our inland lakes do not have state agencies going out on a regular basis and testing for the toxins. So it's giving us a tool to know how safe our water is in near real time. Did want to show you an image of what this can look like. This was 2011. A colleague of mine that works for the USGS, a Dr. Richard Krause, him and his family out on a boat near Marblehead, just to show you how green and viscous those waters can get. I did want to talk again a little bit more about the research being done here. So Ohio Sea Grant, in collaboration with the University of Toledo, since 2015 have been funding $2 million worth of research every year. And those research projects are trying to aim at 4 focus areas. And I'm just going to highlight those 4 focus areas for you real quickly. I won't go into great detail on the almost $9 million spent and some 50 plus projects. But a lot of those projects are trying to address safe drinking water. So how do we treat the water that's pulled into our drinking water plants so that we can ensure our customers are able to consume that? I know my father told me never to say never, but I'll knock on wood here and say that we should not have another Toledo water crisis. Those water treatment plant operators have the upgrades, the tools, and the technology to remove those toxins. They also have a lot of warning when these toxins are coming. If we do have another consumption advisory or a drinking water advisory, it'll because of human error. We didn't put the right dose of chemical in or things like that. We do have the technology now. Also, it's critical to look at human health. So a lot of projects that we've been funding are looking at what are the target organs for this toxin. So we knew it was a liver toxin for a long time. We're starting to see that it has respiratory, kidney, skin impacts. And we are showing that people that have pre-existing liver and kidney conditions are at more risk. We actually have people looking at inhalation because a lot of people will go out on the lake saying, hey, I'm just going to recreate out there. I'm not drinking the water. We're looking at aerosolization from waves and boat wake to see how that might impact residents. We're looking at how blooms behave. So that was pretty much the research you're seeing prior to this slide, knowing where the blooms are, when they become big, when they shut down, when do they produce toxins. A lot of that work is going on right now also. The last one is nutrient runoff. So we're spending a lot of our time right now trying to figure out how to stop the phosphorus from getting into the system. So a lot of this is working with manure application, how to better apply fertilizer, at what time. And it's also looking at runoff from suburban and urban areas. And I'd be happy to answer a lot more questions at the end of this presentation if people have specifics about drinking water, human health, bloom behavior, or nutrients. I did want to introduce you to some of the stuff that's going on through the governor's H2 Ohio initiative. Many of you are probably familiar with this. Large portions of money are going to the DNR to build wetlands across the state. Right now, there's 26 that either have an architect and engineer hired or even have plans to construct wetlands. I think 12 will be done before October of this year. Some of these are along the coastline, but some of these are up inland too, up in our inland landscape. I did want to announce that Sea Grant and a bunch of our colleagues are members of a consortium called LEARN. It's the Lake Erie and Aquatic Research Network. It's a network of academics across the state trying to share resources and expertise. LEARN, basically it's about 8 scientists, has been hired to do all of the wetland sampling. So these academics are developing the plan on what you would measure, how frequently, how to test it, so that we can inform the governor and the state of Ohio how well these wetlands are doing. I was also asked by some of your Rotarians to talk a little bit about the H2 Ohio money going to ag. These are the 10 practices that a bunch of academics and private industry got together and said would probably be the biggest bang for our buck to deploy across the landscape. I will tell you after further vetting, 1 through 7 are the ones that are getting investment under H2 Ohio. So making sure farmers know how to soil test and to follow those soil tests, to apply fertilizer at a variable rate, so only apply as much as your crops need, to inject that fertilizer. So number 3 is subsurface placement. So rather than putting the fertilizer on the surface where it can be carried away, How do we put it on the surface? Same thing for manure. Crop rotation studies. How do we put cover crops down and work on drain water management? Happy to report that the ODA got more requests from more farmers than they anticipated to put this money in play. Last I heard, it's about 1.3 million acres will get funding to do one or more of these 7 things, and that's roughly about 2,000 farmers. Rounding this out, I did get a quick indication that if I could touch briefly on dredging, this is of importance to folks in Toledo. Basically what we're knowing is that there is an open water disposal of dredge material that's been banned in this year. So by the end of this year, we should not be taking the dredge, as you can see in this left picture, putting it on a barge and dropping it into the open water. So what's going on below that image is the 4 different routes of how to use that dredge. To clean it and use it for ag, to use it for construction and engineering uses, to build products out of, things like bricks or planters, and then to build wetlands, which is this environmental enhancement. So the EPA is investing in a lot of projects to help us figure out how to convert this dredge into one of these 4 things. The picture on the bottom right just shows you of the 8 navigable channels in Lake Erie, these are the ones where the most dredging happens. Clearly Toledo, about 1 million cubic yards of sediment annually. And this next image will drive that home. This is an image of all the ports that get dredged. And the size of the circle indicates the amount of material pulled out of those ports. You can see the Toledo port, the Maumee, is clearly the largest across all the Great Lakes. And one of the last things I wanted to mention is our aquatic invasive species. This is always on people's minds that are friends of the lake. What I've listed here is that we have identified through the study called GLMRS, the Great Lakes and Mississippi River Interbasin Study, we have identified the 4 direct connections from Ohio into Lake Erie. Most people think that this invasive carp in the bottom left-hand picture is going to make it through the Chicago sanitary shipping canals. Most of our research has showed the more probable route for us is one of these 4 routes. I am happy to report that all 4 of these either have construction completed, in plan, or in the engineering phase. So they're actually either building concrete dikes or dams or rerouting water flow so that we won't get introductions of the Asian carp from the Ohio River Basin into the Lake Erie Basin. And then the last one I wanted to mention is climate change. Folks in Toledo, I know up on our island in Oregon, we have a lot of high water right now. This image is just to show you that you can always get real-time or neo-real-time Army Corps of Engineer data. This comes from the Toledo Army Corps of Engineer office. So what you're looking at is the long-term average is this dotted line. And then the records are these hash marks at the top. So the record highs and the record lows. And the black line is the current mean observation. This data is a little old. I didn't get the July one pulled up. But this cone is where the USGS is the Army Corps is projecting water levels to be. You can see we have set records all the way back in 2019. We set 6 new records actually, and we're setting records in 2020 at the same time. Rather than a graph, just to drive this home, this is one of our vessels called the Biolab sitting next to one of our docks in the 60s. You can see the top of that boat. So you can see the rails across the bow and the top of the helm there. If I go to a 2000s picture, this is that same boat in 2014. So what you were seeing before was just these railings in the top of the boat. So the water level is up maybe 2 or 3 feet. Well, this is 2019. Now, not only is the boat up high, but you can see the water is actually on our docks. And so that is the current state of water levels right now. And we see from all the evidence that I've been seeing is that the water levels are trending down, but they don't trend down very quickly. So we're looking at high water for, I would say, the foreseeable future. So that's my little glimpse into HABs and dredging and invasive species and water levels, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have about any issues in Lake Erie right now.
Thank you, Dr. Winslow. I appreciate the presentation. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and hit the raise your hand functionality under your participant, or also you can submit via chat. One question that has already been submitted was wondering whether or not we could get a copy of your slideshow to distribute.
Absolutely. And there's actually, I always put, because people ask questions, I always put slides in the background. So there's more information in here for you too, but I'll send it along. Actually, I think Walter already has it, and feel free to save it as a PDF and send it out.
Excellent. And we've got a question from Rob Crane.
Please, Rob, what do you have?
Could you expound a little bit more on the wetland restoration projects that are going on, and specifically where you expect we're going to get the most bang for our buck with this idea of coastal restoration and also working upstream further in the water?
Yeah, so 26 of them, and they are spread. I think there's only maybe 3 outside of the Maumee River Basin. So most of the inland ones are in the Maumee River Basin. And then as far as the coastal ones, these are going to be things like your Cullen Park in Toledo. Sandusky Bay is doing some great restoration projects. So from my perspective, my academic perspective here is that to be determined, but I think we might get a little bit more bang for our buck from a phosphorus retention in the upland wetlands. It's better to stop those things from the source. If you're going to have the coastal wetlands, you might be a little too late in the game. Now, that said, Cullen Park has some great possibilities, because if you can get some vegetation rolling in there, slow the movement of water, you might be able to get those nutrients to drop out. What I love about those coastal projects is they're not only going to help a little bit with the phosphorus, but that will provide amazing nursery habitat for your fish. So what a great value add for your panfish, your walleye, your yellow perch. So I think it'll be a good add for that. Same thing in the Sandusky Bay. The Sandusky Bay has a bloom earlier than the Western Basin and lasts much longer than the Western Basin. And most of that's because, yes, we're getting nutrients from the rivers that dump into Sandusky Bay, but because that bay is so shallow, every time you get a storm, those nutrients get mixed up. So wetland placement in that Sandusky Bay will probably do a good job of holding those nutrients and sediments in place. But this is why the monitoring is going on. That is a priori guess on what wetlands will perform the best. But we are going into each one of those and monitoring them very intensely over the next 2 years for sure. That's what we have in a biennial budget under H2 Ohio. But we're very excited to see. We're also doing the inland wetlands, they're not all the same. Some of them are just kind of flooding an area like a floodplain. Some are actually taking ag drainage ditches, and rather than dumping them directly into a river, pumping them through a wetland first so they can suck those nutrients out. Some of them will be more closed wetlands, so just changing groundwater movement. So what we're going to learn from this is that all wetlands are not created equal. And if we're going to get a good bang for our buck, this is the great experiment to be running for the next 2 years.
Excellent. So we have a question that was actually typed in from Don Yerkes, and it was, how long have algal blooms been an issue in the Great Lakes? And he says he recalls banning phosphates in laundry detergents in the mid-'70s, supposedly to help with this.
It did. It knocked it out of the park. So back in the late 60s, early 70s was when we saw the same thing. Different player. It was an organism named Ephanizamenon, but it was still phosphorus, but it was coming from phosphorus in our detergents. So your Rotarian hit the nail on the head. And it also came from point source, which is basically primarily wastewater treatment plants. So our wastewater treatment plants did a good job in the 60s and 70s of getting the pathogens and the viruses out of the water, but they did nothing to remove nutrients. So the double approach of removing phosphates from our detergents, so we weren't sending as much to the wastewater treatment plants, was step one. But then retrofitting all of those wastewater treatment plants to remove the phosphorus was step number 2. We cut our phosphorus input into Lake Erie by 2/3 back in the 70s. So it was like 33,000 metric tons of phosphorus. We cut it to 11,000. So the phosphorus is still in that 11,000, 12,000 range, but the problem now is it's not coming through point source. It's coming from land runoff, and it's coming into the system dissolved. And before it was more attached to many things. And so the nature of the beast is a little different now.
Excellent. All right, Janina Douglas. Go ahead, Janina.
Great. I just wanted to say that Chris is a modest guy, but I want everybody to realize how much of the progress that's being made is due to what he's done in fostering a sense of collaboration between the universities in our area. Back in 2011, when I had just come back to this area and we had our horrible year, Some of the universities even not only didn't have projects they worked on together, but might have even felt they were a little bit in competition. And Chris has really worked with others to build these consortia that have attacked some of these problems and are making such tremendous strides. There's just a lot blooming on the horizon, a lot of action that's been taken, and a lot on the edge of coming to really make a difference. So I think he should get credit. And anything you'd like to say about maybe some of those consortia? I know you mentioned it a couple of times, but I'm not sure people really caught the importance of what you've done with that.
Thank you, Janina. That's great. And thank you for all your work in this space to really educate thousands upon thousands of people. Yeah, so the consortium she's mentioning it's again, the acronym is LEARN. So it's the Lake Erie and Aquatic Research Network. So basically what we've tried to do is get anybody that does water related research, whether it's in the water, an engineer in water space, if it's somebody that does health risks from polluted water, even if it's a social scientist looking at equal distribution of water across impoverished populations to maybe more well-off populations. And all these academics are getting together because not one brain can solve these. And so I'm just happy that the academics have bought in, and more importantly, the leadership at the universities have realized that maybe it's not as important to get a $1.3 million grant to BGSU if we can get 3 partners together and show collaboration. And so I think it's really getting some momentum. And not only does LEARN connect the academics, but the reason why the wetland project happened, so meaning that LEARN is sampling the H2 Ohio wetlands, is because a woman named Dr. Janice Kearns, who is the Old Woman Creek supervisor, she came to us. She basically said, I'm being asked by Director Mertz from the ODNR to find a way to sample these wetlands. I think LEARN is the way to go. So the agencies are recognizing, rather than going to one academic, it's better to go to a team of academics across multiple institutions.
Excellent. You got a question on the text from John Wasserman. He was asking you what the status of the fish, specifically walleye, are in Lake Erie.
Not a better day to be an angler. The yellow perch and walleye populations are off the charts. So we have had back-to-back-to-back record years. I know charter captains that are having their 6 packs. So 6 different anglers go out and they're each able to take 5 walleye. They're getting 30 within the first hour and a half and heading back in again. Yellow perch have been a little trickier. Yellow perch has switched their diet on us a little bit. They're eating a little aquatic organism called Bifidobacterium, or the spiny water flea. That's an invasive, was not native to the Great Lakes. And it basically sits just a little off the bottom of the lake, about a meter or a yard, depending on which system you want to use. And so they're sitting off the bottom, just gouging their stomachs with this little critter. And so all the anglers that are used to fishing for yellow perch on the bottom are having a rough time. So if you have any angler friends, tell them to pull their lure off the bottom about a meter or a yard. They're there, but their bellies are full. So we don't have a yellow perch population problem. We have a yellow perch hunger problem.
That's good to know. Nobody has excuses for not catching anything now.
That's right. No excuses. Can't take it.
All right. Rick Arnos, go ahead, sir.
Okay, well, thanks, Chris, for this great presentation. It's hard to believe your voice didn't squeak at all with all the pain in your back. Hopefully you'll get some relief this afternoon. But one thing on the phosphorus that always seems to come up is with the algal blooms, is a lot of the issue the phosphorus that is already residing in the lake and is at the bottom and it's just kind of stirred up and dredged up? Or is it more the issue of phosphorus that's flowing in each year? And if it is what's already in there, I mean, how quickly does it dissipate? And maybe you could just speak about that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So in typical researcher fashion, I'll have to say it depends. Lake Erie, it is primarily dissolved phosphorus coming out of the Maumee. So if we cut our phosphorus input by 40%, problem goes away overnight. We've gone out and studied, again, across academic institutions, Cleveland State, Akron, Kent, Bowling Green, Toledo. They went out and put a bunch of different types of devices to measure the nutrients coming from the bottom of the lake into the surface during storms. And the estimates varied depending on the technique and the sample approach. But it's somewhere between 3 and 7% of the phosphorus in the water that drives blooms comes from the bottom. Only 3 to 7%. Now, Grand Lake St. Mary's is like 12 feet deep entire, right? And so what happens there is you do have to shut off the phosphorus coming in, which we've done some good work on. If you're familiar with the distressed watersheds that were put in Grand Lake St. Mary's, it put a lot of financial incentives to basically build more storage for sewage, for manure. And so we're measuring those rivers are showing less input from year to year to year. They're not where they need to be, but we're making progress. But I would say, and I don't have the data in front of me, but I bet you about 80% of the phosphorus that drives blooms in Grand Lake is coming from stuff already in the lake. So they're going to have to go through and dredge out a lot of that material or find some way to bind that phosphorus to the sediments so that it doesn't get released. So Sandusky Bay is the same issue. Sandusky Bay's got a large input from the river, but I would say 40 to 60% is probably coming from the bay itself. So each system has a different source of that phosphorus, but Lake Erie primarily is the Maumee River Basin.
Interesting. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next one is actually from Bob Savage, which is, he missed what you said. So the question was, do you think Asian carp will come from Lake Michigan? And separately, what do you think of water sampling versus aerial or satellite monitoring?
Good. So the first one for the Asian carp. So I think it could come from Lake Michigan, but I think our more likely route is the Ohio River through one of those 4 connections. So that's why I'm so glad that the DNR and the Army Corps are nipping that in the bud. Because think about it, these organisms, Asian carps, the way they feed basically is they open up their mouth and just swim through the water, and they basically filter feed all the algae. So that's why if they get to Lake Erie, there's going to be so much food for them here. But if you've ever spent time on Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, if you go there, those lakes are really, really clear blue lakes. And so we're actually, as an academic community, don't know if, even if the Asian carp gets into the Michigan River or Lake Michigan, can it survive and travel from there up the Michigan through the the Straits of Mackinac, down through the Huron and into Erie? So that route may be actually harder than coming through Ohio. So, but again, the jury's out on that. You know, we learn about behavior of fish post them being introduced to places that we don't want them. So we have no idea how well they'll survive in Michigan and Huron. And then to come to the second part of that, water sampling versus aerial satellites, you need one to inform the other. So the reason why we can do those satellite images that I showed in my PowerPoint is because what you have to do is you have to have a scientist in the water collecting a sample at the exact time a satellite passes overhead. Because what you do then is you go back to the lab and you count all the critters in that water and you tie back the critters with the wavelengths that hit the satellite. So you could never use that satellite data unless you had the ground truth first. So for example, just to give you kind of a rudimentary, when you see the color red, it's because that object is absorbing every wavelength of light except for red that bounces off and comes back to your eyes. So the satellites are doing the same thing, but they're doing it in the infrared and smaller wavelengths. And so what they do is as all the light gets sucked up by critters and things living in the lake, it's the signal that goes back to the satellite that tells you whether they're there or not. So we would not know what those wavelengths or bands of light at the satellites mean unless we were measuring it in the water. And for me, it's always better to do the water sample, but look at how big Lake Erie is. You can't be everywhere all the time. And so to get the best estimate of the lake, satellites are key. But if you want to know what's going on in one location at a specific time, water sampling is always the best route.
Excellent. All right, Yuval. See if we can get you to unmute.
Here. Yeah. Chris, wonderful presentation. Really enjoyed it. My question is about the water level. Is there any past records of similar levels anytime in the past?
Yeah, so back in the 60s, let me see if I still actually, yeah, so in the 60s, it fluctuates pretty wildly. So let me show you, if you guys can actually get me to share my screen again, I can run through this. Let's see, share screen. So I'm just going to take you, and anybody can do this. This is, I just typed in U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Buffalo, and it'll bring up this table. And you can go over here to the Great Lakes Basin conditions. So, right, if I click on any one of these are the maps. I will click on this big one here and then zoom in for you. So this is the map let me minimize your guys' lovely photos so I can use my cursors, and I'll zoom in. Oop, that's zooming out. So zooming in, this is each one of the Great Lakes. And so you'll see the symbols here. Basically, there's Erie, and you can see where it's been. And this is through this year. But if I go back to that website again, I thought I had, is this the annual one? Nope, that's still, they used to have one that was by years. Let's see if I can see that one here. Oh, water level data. Sorry to occupy your time. This long graph here is what our lakes look like through time. So it goes back all the way to 1918 are the measurements. So you can see we have a normal ebb and flow of water levels here, right? But look at where we're at here. These are clearly record highs. We had some highs in the late 80s and the late 90s, but back in the 60s, we had pretty low water levels. Even back in the 30s were pretty low too. But it's a cool, oh, I was on Lake St. Clair, but you can see where this is at again, back in the 60s, pretty low water levels, but the highs.
Yeah, I can, Chris, actually, I was just up in Lake Charlevoix up in northern Michigan last week, and they're having their highest since 86, 87, like you pointed out, where, you know, even gas stocks are being shut down because there's no electrical, you know, capabilities. The waters are too high.
100%.
So it's just crazy this year.
Well, I can't wait to see the DNR do its fish sampling again because it's such high water, we have more wetland habitat and more nursery. So I'm wondering if our yellow perch and walleye are actually capitalizing on high water to have more places to eat and hide from predators. So, you know, got to always find that silver lining. It's terrible for us that like to be on the water or live on the water, but for the fish, they may love it.
Yep. Chris Anderson. Oops. Sorry about that, Chris. I clicked on you twice and I think I'm muted. There you go.
Thanks, Chris. I was curious, is there anything going on across the Ohio State institution, cross-functional? So you got agronomy, ag economics, other sciences, and your organization. Is there anything going on at the campus or the organizational level from a collaborative standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I report to two vice presidents. One is for the Office of Research and one is for the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences. So Dean Kress, Vice President Kress, she's doing a tremendous amount to make sure that her engineers are talking to her economists. I mean, they're even doing things like, and you probably saw it, it was a weird commercial I saw the other day with, I think it was, sorry for the selfish plug, but Burger King. The food that they're feeding their cows changes the level of methane that they flatulate or belch. They're doing the same to fine tune the food that they give to cows and pigs so that the manure out of the back end has less phosphorus in it, right? That's what you want. You want to take a diet in where everything in that meal is used by your body and not excreted. And so you have food engineers learning how to build the better cow food so that you're not pooping phosphorus. All of that stuff going on. And then, as I said, with my role for the Office of Research, I meet monthly with the head of the Sustainability Institute, which is really looking at energy issues. I meet with the Ohio Water Resource Center, which is a USGS funded center. I talk monthly with my colleagues across OSU so that they know the research that I've been seeing and reading. If I give a presentation and get a cool question, I make sure I pass it on to them. So not only across the university, but specifically within the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences, they're bringing all their assets to the table.
Interesting.
They're the ones working with John Deere to figure out how do we inject the fertilizer in with the seed rather than sit it at the surface. So you've got engineering of equipment, you've got engineering of feed, you've got engineering of wetlands, all of that stuff is being done collaboratively across the university.
Okay. Let's see here. Chuck Stocking. Maybe. There we go.
Yeah, I was interested in that. Your last comment was really fascinating in terms of the manure management. Starting at the source it sounds like a great idea. I'm curious as to what percentage of it are we managing in that way, and are there any other creative things going on? I think for a long period of time there was a sense that they were the bad boys and they were dumping all these for the big confinement feeding operations, the industrial farms. And but I got to believe that there's some stuff going on to better manage the manures and turn it from a liability into an asset. What can you share about that?
Yeah, and so I know there's some early discussions there a lot with the economists, building things like what we're early on referring to as manure cooperatives. What we found that if you have to haul manure more than, this is an estimate, more than 10 miles, you're actually losing money on the deal, right? So you need to use that manure close to home. And the problem has been historically is what farmers do is then just apply it within that circled 10-mile radius, and they're applying it even if they don't need it, right? And so that's where we get these elevated fields. It wasn't per malicious intent of those farmers. You talk to a lot of farmers, they would rather put manure on their field than a commercially bought fertilizer because it has more than just phosphorus. It has nitrogen, it has microorganisms, it has some cool, healthy stuff in there. So the problem has just been is that we didn't know how to effectively or efficiently move it. So there is some work going on now where we go to farmers and say, well, let's do this. How many farmers that have to haul manure are within a 10-mile radius of each other? Can we get them talking to each other and store all of that manure in one location? And the reason why I say that is because all the economics that I'm seeing says that if you can't process that manure, meaning spinning the water out and holding the phosphorus back, if you can't get that to about 5 cents per gallon, no farmer can afford it. So there's an economy of scales, right? So what you need to do is get all those farmers that have a little bit of phosphorus or a little bit of manure, get them to all put it at one site and build an industry off of it. Have somebody say, and I don't know how that, I'm not a business, finance person, but, do you let them drop it off for free because you're going to sell it for a profit? Or do you have to actually charge them from the manure in order to make the profit? And so how that market looks, how you advertise it, what's the price points, like I have no idea in that space, but I know those discussions are going on. And let's go back to the, some of the comments you made, which are, very, common sense comments to make. When we think of animal operations, the state actually breaks them into 3 types: small, medium, and large. When we hear the word CAFOS, by that definition, that is a permitted facility. And in Ohio, only the large ones are permitted. And I would argue that those large companies, they have to have, because they're permitted, they have to have a nutrient management plan. They have to tell you how much they're producing and where it's going. So usually those aren't our current day, quote unquote, bad actors. Plus they typically have the resources to go out and buy those innovative technologies to do different things with it. We think it's more the small and medium operations that just don't have the infrastructure, don't have the number of fields to apply it on, don't have the ability to haul it. So again, you ask those small and medium operations, they don't want to be applying excess phosphorus to their fields. They just fiscally cannot. And put this into the previous question, which was, what are the resources happening at Ohio State University? We're looking at market analysis. I mean, imagine being a farmer that's trying to figure out a better way to haul manure longer when tariffs are all over the place. And I'm not trying to get into the R versus D political discussion, but remember, these farmers are working in grain markets that they have no control over. And so this is just a very difficult economic situation to be stuck in.
Excellent. Dr. Winslow, thank you very much. Alex, I'm going to turn everything back over to you, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Travis. Dr. Winslow, I do have one quick question for you. Years ago, you would hear a lot about the zebra mussel, okay? And it's as much of a nuisance as they might have been. It was my understanding that the lake was probably the clearest it ever was. What happened to the zebra mussel?
Great question. They don't get enough attention anymore because they're not going anywhere, right? It actually was the zebra mussel in the 90s. If you go down to the lake right now and pull up a rock and bring it to the surface, 90% of it's what's called a quagga mussel. They're in the same genus. They're related to each other. They're both from Europe, the Black and Caspian Seas. They are filter feeders. And so what they do is they take the water from the water column. Anything that's stuck in that water column gets stuck on their mucus covered gills. That's what they eat. And then they dispel clean water. So they have cleaned up, they've cleaned up the transparency of the water, which is a good thing because now there's more light. We've had plants that were growing in Lake Erie in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that we thought were extirpated or extinct that are now growing again. So that's a positive. The negative side is that we still have some sediments that are toxic at the bottom of the lake, and those mussels will build up those toxins, and then those are eaten by another invasive called round gobies, and those round gobies are eaten by things by smallmouth bass, yellow perch, walleye. So we're still worried about the mussels from a toxin amplification problem, moving it from the bottom into the food web. And the other concern, they do have a little bit of a role to play in harmful algal blooms, because again, you need phosphorus to grow these cyanobacteria, but you also need light. So just like that clear water is allowing plants to grow that we haven't seen in a while, it does help the harmful algal blooms grow a little bit too.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much, Dr. Chris Winslow. What a fantastic and informative talk. Definitely appreciate. Glad you were able to come on today, because it is my first meeting as the president, and I would have really been scrambling if you didn't show up.
No, I'm sure I scared you a little bit there. I was having problems with the internet, and then sitting up has become a task today. I'll tell you what, I've been on a lot of Zoom meetings for the last 3 months. This went really well. You guys are an organized bunch. Thank you for all you're doing. You guys take care.
All right. Again, thank you. Thank you,
care.
Doctor. Okay, so next week, Monday the 27th, we've got John Huco, Rotary International General Secretary. And events and happenings this week, there are no meetings today. I do want to mention that Habitat, we're doing a remodel. We need some volunteers for July 25th and July 29th. Again, I did that one day, not last week, the week prior. It was just an excellent, excellent opportunity. So please, if you're interested in that, talk to Kurt Church. I want to reemphasize committees, joining committees. That's how we engage. Again, that's how we engage in our Rotary Club, and that is also how we engage in the community. A preview of speakers after next week, August 3rd. We'll have somebody speaking to us on the census. Not exactly sure who. And then on August 10th, we'll have Toledo's own Jamie Farr. So please remember to tune in to those meetings. Again, thank you for joining us today, all Rotarians. And now I'm going to turn it over to
1 year ago today, for the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, they opened up a restaurant on the moon. The food is good, but there's no atmosphere. A Mexican magician tells the audience he will disappear on the count of 3. Uno, dos, poof. He disappeared without a trace. A couple of people got. You can never lose a homing pigeon. If your homing pigeon doesn't come back, what you've lost is a pigeon. Today at the bank, an elderly lady asked me to help her check her balance, so I pushed her over. My friend can't afford to pay his water bill anymore, so I sent him a card, get well soon. 2, 3, 4. And finally, this is a joke. Back in grade school is when I first heard this joke, and it was considered a dirty joke back then. You could never tell this joke to your parents, and it's very simple. So join me in the Wayback Machine. Here it is. Why is pea soup better than mashed potatoes? And the answer is because anyone can mash potatoes. You'll get it when you're driving home or sometime later this afternoon.
Oh, I think we got most of them now, Chuck. It's just,
okay, well, I'm sorry.
Most everybody's muted and they just can't laugh out loud. Okay, I was holding myself back.
I'll bet you were.
So I need to apologize to everybody. I am aware that my microphone is a little bit cloudy. We'll be working on that this week. Thanks to Walt McGee and the rest of Trav. So again, thank you. Thank you very much again for attending today's meeting. and we are adjourned.